It was one of those afternoons that seemed too peaceful to ever be broken. The sun was warm but gentle, casting a golden light across the neighborhood lawns. The air smelled faintly of fresh grass, and the distant sound of children laughing echoed, like a song of innocence. For most people, it was just another Saturday. But for David, it was a day he had been waiting for all week. David was a proud father, a man in his 50s with tired eyes, but a heart full of love. His daughter, Maya, was visiting him. That alone made the day feel special. David didn't live in the busiest city, nor in the most glamorous neighborhood, but it was safe, quiet, and full of ordinary life. He liked it that way. He worked for years to buy this house, to have a little piece of stability. Whenever Maya came home, he felt like his house came alive. She was his pride, his greatest achievement, far greater than any job or material thing. To everyone else, Maya was just a young black woman in her late 20s, kind, sharp, and graceful. But David knew the deeper truth. Maya was not just his little girl anymore. She was a federal agent. More than that, she was an FBI tactical commander. Still, despite the title, Maya never acted like she was above anyone. She didn't walk around, bragging or carrying herself with arrogance. In fact, to her father's amusement, when neighbors asked her what she did for a living, she often just smiled and said she worked in government. She had seen too much danger in her career to care about impressing people. Strength, she believed, came from humility, not from showing off. That afternoon, after sharing lunch with her father, Maya decided to go for a short walk around the neighborhood. She slipped on her jacket, tied her boots, and told David she'd be back soon. He smiled, reminding her not to overthink, and to just enjoy the day. For David, watching her walk away was bittersweet. She looked so ordinary, so much like the little girl who once played hopscotch on the sidewalk. Yet he knew the world she lived in now was far from ordinary. The neighborhood seemed like the last place trouble could happen. The trees swayed softly in the summer breeze. A man across the street was trimming his hedges. A mother pushed her toddler in a stroller. Two teenagers laughed while racing each other on bicycles. Everything painted a picture of calm, the kind of life David always wanted for his daughter. But life has a way of testing peace. Sometimes danger does not arrive with warning sirens or flashing lights. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, disguised as authority, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. David could not have known that as Maya walked past the corner near the clubhouse, someone else was watching her. He could not have guessed that. Her walk, something so ordinary, was about to turn into something unforgettable. The neighborhood had a homeowners association, and with it came a so-called security team. Most of the time, these guards were harmless, just men in uniforms driving around in little carts, waving at cars, and checking parking stickers. But one of them, a man named Rick, carried himself differently. He wasn't a real police officer, yet he wore his holstered weapon like a badge of honor. His eyes searched for conflict where none existed, and his pride in the little power he had often crossed into arrogance. And when Rick saw Maya walking calmly down the street, his mind twisted with suspicion. He didn't recognize her. He didn't care to ask politely. To him, she didn't fit the picture of who should be walking alone in this neighborhood. What David imagined to be a simple, peaceful walk for his daughter was, in reality, the beginning of a storm that would shake not only the neighborhood, but every neighbor watching. Because in just a few minutes, their safe, quiet street would become the stage of a confrontation no one would ever forget. And for David, it would become the scariest moment of his life, watching his daughter face the kind of danger he never thought would follow her into their quiet home. Maya walked slowly along the sidewalk, enjoying the breeze against her face. She didn't carry her work on her shoulders here. At home, she wasn't Agent Johnson. She was just Maya, David's daughter, the girl who loved long walks and quiet streets. She let her mind drift, remembering childhood moments on this very road. Back then, She never thought the same sidewalks could become dangerous. A faint hum grew louder behind her. It was the small electric engine of the neighborhood patrol cart. She didn't pay much attention at first. The HOA guards often passed by, giving quick nods. They were supposed to watch for trespassers, though most of the time they just circled lazily. But this time, the cart slowed down. It stayed right behind her, moving at her pace. Rick was behind the wheel. His posture was stiff, his jaw set tight. He didn't see a resident enjoying a walk. He saw a stranger, a threat. In his mind, this was his territory, and he was the man in charge. Rick had always believed his role was bigger than it really was. He wasn't sworn law enforcement. He wasn't trained to handle serious conflict. Yet, the weight of the gun at his hip gave him a false sense of power. Rick had built a reputation in the neighborhood. Some families thought of him as overzealous. He asked too many questions, stopped delivery drivers for no reason, and had once even followed a teenage boy walking home because he looked suspicious. Still, most people brushed it off. They said things like, "That's just Rick being Rick." But that kind of thinking was dangerous. As the cart rolled closer, Maya finally turned her head slightly. She could feel his eyes locked on her, heavy with suspicion. Their gazes met for a brief moment. She noticed the way his hand rested close to his holster. It wasn't casual, it was defensive. She stopped walking. Calmly, she said, "Is there a problem?" Rick parked the cart right beside her, leaning out with narrowed eyes. "Yeah, there's a problem. What are you doing here? This is a private community." Maya kept her voice even. "I live here. My father's house is on Oak Street." But Rick didn't soften. His lip curled, as if he didn't believe her. "I don't recognize you. You need to show me ID, right now." Maya shook her head slightly. "I don't have to show you my ID, just for walking in my own neighborhood." Rick's face reddened. He hated being challenged, especially by someone who wasn't showing fear. He leaned further out of the cart, pointing a finger. "Don't play games with me. People like you don't just stroll around here. You better prove you belong." The word stung. People like you. It wasn't the first time Maya had heard it in her life, but hearing it here in the place her father worked so hard to call home lit a quiet fire inside her. She stayed calm. Her training demanded it. But her silence only made Rick more agitated. He expected nervousness, excuses, or quick obedience. Instead, she stood steady, her shoulders relaxed, her voice firm. "I told you where I live. That should be enough," she said by now. A few neighbors noticed the scene. A man watering his lawn paused, the hose still running in his hand. A woman with a stroller slowed down, eyes wide with concern. The tension in the air thickened. Rick stood up from his seat, puffing his chest like a man preparing for a fight. "You think you're smart. You think you can mouth off to me." I said, "Show me ID, or I'll make sure you regret this." Maya's eyes didn't leave his. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "You need to calm down. There is no threat here." But Rick's pride was louder than reason. He felt the eyes of the neighbors on him, and instead of stepping back, he convinced himself he had to step forward. David, sitting on his porch a few houses away, heard the rising voice. His stomach dropped. He recognized Rick's aggressive tone instantly, and his heart raced. He stood quickly, squinting down the street, and when he saw the sight of the guard towering over his daughter, panic ripped through him. He began to move fast, calling out, "Maya." His voice cracked with fear. But Rick didn't even notice David yet. His hand twitched dangerously close to the weapon at his hip. He was no longer just a guard. In his own mind, he was judge, jury, and executioner. And Maya, standing calmly on the sidewalk, was the only thing between his ego and a tragedy. Maya stood still on the sidewalk, her eyes steady, her breathing calm. Years of training had taught her how to face tense situations. She had stared down criminals with weapons before, had walked into raids where bullets flew past her head. But what made this moment sting was not the danger itself, it was the injustice of it. She was standing in her own neighborhood, in front of her father's home, yet she was being treated like an intruder. Rick's voice grew louder. I told, "You two show me ID. Don't test me." His tone wasn't one of a professional. It was the voice of a man desperate to prove his authority, desperate to show everyone around him that he was in control. Maya replied calmly, "You're out of line. I live here. I've already told you where. That's all you need to know." Her calmness only fed his anger. His chest heaved, and his face reddened. He wanted to see fear. He wanted her to stumble, to beg, to obey. Instead, she was standing tall, her hands at her side, unshaken. To Rick, it felt like defiance. By now, neighbors were gathering. Some stayed on porches, whispering to each other. Others pulled out their phones, recording what was happening. The air felt heavy, as if the whole street was holding its breath. Rick stepped closer. His hand brushed the grip of his gun, and his voice cracked like thunder. "Don't you move. Don't you take another step, or I swear you'll regret it." Maya's eyes shifted slightly to his hand. She could see the tremor in his fingers. He wasn't calm. He wasn't trained. He was unpredictable. She raised her hands slowly, not in fear, but in control. Her voice was steady. "You're making a mistake. There is no threat here." At that moment, David's voice rang out from down the street. "That's my daughter." He was running now, his legs moving faster than they had in years. His heart slammed against his chest. Fear shot through him like fire. He had seen stories on the news, stories of black men and women whose lives ended in seconds because someone like Rick thought they looked suspicious. And now, his own daughter was staring down the barrel of that same danger. But Rick didn't turn. His focus stayed locked on Maya. His pride wouldn't let him hear reason. "Don't lie to me," he barked. "I've never seen you before. You don't belong here." The words hit Maya harder than the gun pointed at her. "You don't belong here." It was the phrase that too many people of her skin color had heard. In stores, on sidewalks, in classrooms, and now, even in the neighborhood where her father lived, she was being told she didn't belong. Maya's voice dropped low, but her eyes stayed sharp. "You need to think very carefully about what you're doing." Rick's breath came out fast and shallow. His hand tightened on the weapon. His whole body screamed with the need to control the situation, but in truth, he had already lost control. He was trembling, and everyone around could see it. David was almost there now, his throat dry, his chest aching. He screamed again, "That's my daughter, Maya. She lives here. Put the gun down." His voice was full of terror, but also of rage. The neighbors began shouting too. A man yelled, "She's not doing anything." Another voice rang out, "You're going too far, Rick." But Rick didn't listen. His ego was deaf to the voices around him. All he saw was Maya's calmness, and all he felt was the fear that she wasn't afraid of him. And so, in the middle of a quiet neighborhood street, with children's bicycles still lying on the grass, with neighbors frozen in fear, a security guard's trembling hands pulled his gun free from its holster. The barrel pointed straight at Maya's chest, and David's heart nearly stopped. Time froze the moment Rick pulled the gun. The polished black metal glinted in the afternoon sun, and the world seemed to go silent. Neighbors gasped, some screamed, and others stepped back in fear. The peaceful street that only minutes ago echoed, with children's laughter now carried only one sound, the heavy, ragged breathing of a man gripping a weapon he should never have drawn. David's heart shattered at the sight. His knees almost gave way as he ran. His daughter stood with a gun pointed at her, and he felt helpless, trapped in a nightmare he had prayed would never touch his family. "Please," he shouted with a voice that cracked like breaking glass. "That's my daughter. Don't shoot." But Rick's ears were deaf to reason. His pride screamed louder than the voices around him. His eyes darted nervously, his finger twitching on the trigger. He had lost control, but in his mind, The only way to get it back was through fear. Hands higher. Rick barked, the gun shaking in his grip. Don't move an inch. Don't you dare move. Maya slowly raised her hands higher, her palms open. Her movements were deliberate, professional, every motion meant to calm the fire in front of her. She did not tremble. She did not plead. Her voice carried steady, even though danger stood inches away. You need to lower that weapon, she said softly, but firmly. This is not how you handle this. The crowd that had gathered held their breath. A woman covered her child's eyes. An older man whispered under his breath, "Oh God, please." Someone further back pulled out their phone, recording every second. David reached the edge of the scene, his chest heaving. He wanted to throw himself in front of his daughter, to shield her, but he knew one sudden move could set off the bullet. His hands shook violently as he cried out, "She's done. Nothing wrong. She belongs here. Please, don't hurt her." Rick's gun wavered slightly as his eyes darted between Maya and the crowd. The pressure of so many eyes on him only twisted his temper further. His pride wouldn't let him back down. "I said she doesn't belong here. She's lying, I know. She's lying." Maya tilted her head just slightly, her eyes locking onto his with a sharpness that made him hesitate. Her voice was low, almost like a command, but calm enough to pierce through his panic. "You're pointing a loaded gun at an innocent person. If you pull that trigger, your life will change forever. Is this really the choice you want to make?" The words hung heavy in the air. Rick's breathing grew faster, his hands trembled. For a moment, his finger tightened on the trigger, and the crowd gasped in horror. David's heart almost stopped beating, but Maya didn't flinch. Her training told her that fear only gave power to the person holding the gun. So instead of fear, she gave him calm. Instead of panic, she gave him strength. "You don't want to do this," she said again, steady as stone. "Put it down now." Tears burned in David's eyes. He had never felt so powerless, watching his little girl, his pride, his joy stand with death, staring her down. He wanted to scream, to fight, to rip the weapon away, but all he could do was trust her calmness, trust the strength she carried within her. The neighbors were whispering now, some crying quietly, others frozen in silence. The scene felt unreal, like a nightmare painted across a quiet suburban street. A few children peeked from windows, eyes wide with fear, and in the middle of it all, Maya stood like a stone in the storm, her voice calm, her presence unshaken. Rick's hand shook harder, sweat dripped down his forehead. His pride told him to stand his ground, but his fear made him weak. He was no longer a guard. He was just a man with a weapon he should never have carried. And in that moment, every single person watching knew one thing: one wrong breath, one wrong twitch, could decide life or death. David whispered a prayer under his breath. "Please, God, not my baby girl." The air was thick with fear, yet Maya's calm voice cut through it like a blade. Every second stretched longer than the last. The gun stayed pointed at her chest, trembling in the hands of a man who had already lost control. David stood just steps away, his hands trembling, his breath broken. His heart screamed for him to grab his daughter and pull her to safety, but one wrong move could make the nightmare real. He could only watch, tears burning his eyes. "Please, Maya," he whispered. But Maya was not afraid. Her body was steady, her eyes sharp. She had been trained for moments like this, not exactly this, but close enough. She had faced hardened criminals, gang leaders, men who had far more reason to shoot her than Rick ever did. Yet here she was, standing in front of a neighborhood guard, with too much ego and too little training. "You need to put the gun down," she said again, slow and steady, "before you do something you can't take back." Rick's face twitched. He could feel the weight of the neighbor's eyes, the cameras recording, the whispers echoing. His pride burned inside him. He wanted to be the man in control. He wanted to show strength. Instead, everyone could see the truth. He was shaking, sweating, stumbling over his own fear. "Don't tell me what to do," Rick shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "I'm the authority here. I decide who belongs and who doesn't." Maya tilted her head slightly, her voice lowered, calm but commanding. "No, you're wrong. You don't get to decide that, and you have no authority to point a weapon at me." The firmness in her tone unsettled him. For a brief second, doubt flickered in his eyes. David saw it too. He recognized his daughter's voice, the one she used when she meant business, the one that never shook. He had always admired her strength, but right now, it terrified him, because the stronger she stood, the angrier Rick seemed to grow. Then Maya spoke again, her words slower, sharper. "You have no idea who you're pointing that gun at," Rick sneered. "Oh yeah? Who are you supposed to be?" His laugh was nervous, uneven, the kind of laugh a man uses to cover his fear. Maya took a careful step back, her hand still raised. Every move was controlled, every second was deliberate. Slowly, she reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. The crowd gasped, some thinking she might make a sudden move, but her motions were precise, calm, non-threatening. From the pocket, she pulled out a small leather wallet. With a flick of her wrist, she opened it, holding it steady for everyone to see. The gold badge inside caught the sunlight. "Special Agent Maya Johnson," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "FBI Tactical Commander." The street erupted in whispers and gasps. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide, jaws dropping. The phone's recording zoomed in, capturing the badge, the authority, the truth. David felt his chest swell with both fear and pride. His baby girl, the one he had raised with love and discipline, was standing as a protector of justice in front of everyone. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he whispered, "That's my daughter." Rick's face went pale. His hands shook harder, the gun wobbling as if it might fall. You're lying," he stammered. "That's fake. It's a trick." Maya stepped forward slightly, her eyes sharp as steel. "It's not fake, and if you don't lower that weapon right now, you'll be facing federal charges before the sun sets." The crowd murmured louder. A woman shouted, "She's an FBI agent." "You're in trouble now, Rick." Rick's breathing quickened. His pride fought with the crushing truth in front of him. The weapon in his hand no longer gave him power, it made him look smaller, weaker, foolish. Maya didn't blink. Her voice rose, not in anger, but in absolute authority. "You just pulled a gun on a federal agent. You pointed it at an innocent woman in her own neighborhood. Do you understand what you've done?" Rick swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his forehead. His voice cracked as he muttered, I didn't know, I thought." Maya didn't let him finish. Her voice was steady, unshaken. "You thought wrong, and that mistake could have cost me my life. It could have cost you everything." The silence that followed was heavy. Every neighbor, every witness, could feel the weight of her words, and in that silence, Rick's world began to crumble. For a moment, the street was silent. Only the sound of the wind moving through the trees could be heard. Every neighbor, every pair of eyes, was locked on Rick, and the gun still trembling in his hands. Maya's badge glinted in the sunlight, a symbol of truth that no one could deny. The weight of it crushed Rick's pride. He had wanted control. He had wanted to show power. But now, the very thing he had tried to use against her exposed him as weak, reckless, and dangerous. Rick's lips trembled as he muttered, I didn't know. I didn't mean." His voice was broken, stripped of the confidence he once shouted with. He looked less like a guard and more like a scared child who had just realized he had played with fire. Maya did not lower her hands. Yet, her eyes stayed locked on him, cold and commanding. "You pointed a loaded weapon at a federal agent and at an innocent daughter walking near her home. Do you understand what that means?" Rick's knees almost buckled. His hand shook so badly, the gun wobbled in the air. The neighbors gasped, terrified he might fire by mistake. One man shouted, "Put it down, Rick, before you hurt someone." David was still frozen in place, his hands gripping his chest. His breathing was ragged, but his eyes never left his daughter. Pride and fear mixed inside him. He had known she was strong, but watching her take command of the very man who had threatened her life left him speechless. His heart whispered, "That's my little girl. That's my warrior." Maya's voice grew sharper now, slicing through Rick's excuses. "No, don't say you didn't know. You chose this. You saw me walking, and instead of treating me like a neighbor, you treated me like a criminal. You thought you could scare me into proving myself. And then, when your ego wasn't satisfied, you drew a weapon." The crowd began to murmur louder. Some shook their heads in disgust. A woman whispered to another, "He could have killed her." Another voice added, "She's FBI. He's finished." Rick stammered, his face red, sweat dripping down his temples. I thought." Maya stepped forward, her voice steady as stone. "You thought because I'm black, I didn't belong here." The words hit like a hammer. The neighbors froze. Some looked down in shame. Others nodded, knowing it was true. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound of any gunshot. Rick opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth was laid bare. His pride was gone, his authority shattered. All he could do was shake, his weapon drooping lower and lower. In his trembling hand, "Drop the gun," Maya ordered, her voice sharp now, like she was commanding one of her own recruits during training. Now, Rick's hand finally gave way. The weapon slipped from his grip and clattered against the pavement. The metallic sound echoed through the street, and a collective sigh of relief spread through the crowd. Two neighbors rushed forward cautiously, kicking the weapon away. Another man muttered, "He's finished, completely finished." The HOA president, a balding man in a crisp polo shirt, hurried onto the scene, his face pale as chalk. "Agent Johnson, I am so sorry. This is a misunderstanding. Please." Maya turned to him, her expression firm and unyielding. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was negligence. This was prejudice. And this was a crime." The president stuttered, "We will handle it internally. We'll suspend him." Maya cut him off like a blade. "No, you will not handle it internally. He pointed a firearm at me without cause. That's not an HOA matter. That's a matter for law enforcement." Rick's face went white. His knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the curb, his head buried in his hands. He had wanted to be the man in charge, but now he sat like a broken figure, small and powerless before the truth. The neighbors looked at Maya, some with awe, some with guilt, and others with relief. She stood strong, her hands finally lowering, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. David stepped beside her, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. His eyes glistened with tears. "You saved yourself," he whispered. "You saved all of us." And though Maya did not smile, the strength in her eyes told everyone there that peace only survives when someone has the courage to stand against injustice. The gun lay on the pavement, its threat gone, but the fear it left still lingered in every heart on the street. Neighbors stood frozen, some with their phones still recording, others with tears in their eyes. A child cried softly in his mother's arms. The quiet neighborhood was no longer the same. Rick sat slumped on the curb, his face pale, his chest rising and falling in sharp breaths. His hands shook as he tried to speak, but no words came out. His pride was gone, stripped away in front of everyone. The weapon that once made him feel powerful now only exposed his weakness. Maya stood tall in the center of it all, her badge still in her hand, her presence unshaken. She didn't shout, didn't raise her fists, didn't need to. Her calm strength spoke louder than any scream ever could. David finally reached her side, his breathing heavy, his eyes wet with tears. He grabbed her in a trembling embrace, pulling her against his chest, as if he could shield her from the world. "I thought I was going to lose you," he whispered, his voice breaking. I thought he was going to take you away. From me. Maya wrapped her arms around him gently, her voice low and steady. Not today, Dad. I promise you, not today. The sound of sirens cut through the heavy silence. Someone had already called the police, and now flashing red and blue lights painted the street. Officers rushed in, quickly assessing the scene. 2 of them moved straight toward Rick, who sat shaking on the curb. When the officers asked what had happened, a dozen neighbors stepped forward at once, voices rising, pointing toward Rick. Videos were shown. Stories spilled out. It was undeniable. He had pulled a weapon on an innocent woman. Worse, on a federal agent. The officers lifted Rick to his feet and placed handcuffs around his wrists. The clicking sound of metal rang like justice through the air. His head hung low, his face twisted in shame. The man who once barked orders and strutted like a soldier now shuffled like a criminal. The HOA president tried again to smooth things over, but the officers ignored him. This was no HOA matter anymore. This was a federal matter, and Maya made sure everyone knew it. Before Rick was taken away, Maya stepped forward one last time. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut through the night. You almost destroyed 2 lives today, mine and my father's. Remember that the next time you let your pride and prejudice guide your actions. Rick didn't reply. He couldn't. The truth was too heavy to fight. As the police car drove away, the crowd slowly began to scatter. Some neighbors walked up to David and Maya, offering words of apology and support. A woman with tears in her eyes said, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that here. You do belong here." A man added, "You saved us from something worse today. Thank you." Maya didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She only nodded politely. To her, this wasn't about recognition. It was about showing the truth, and the truth had been revealed. Later that evening, after the street returned to a quiet calm, David and Maya sat together on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. David held her hand tightly, unwilling to let go. "I can't believe what happened today," he said softly. "I worked so hard to give you a safe place, and even here, danger found you." Maya turned to him, her eyes gentle but strong. "Dad, danger is everywhere, but so is courage, and as long as we face it, together, we'll always rise above it." He looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. To him, she was no longer just the little girl he once carried on his shoulders. She was a warrior, a protector, a symbol of strength and justice. The neighborhood would never forget that day. They would never forget the sight of a young woman standing unshaken in the face of a drawn gun, and revealing herself not only as a federal agent, but as a daughter unwilling to be broken. And as the evening grew quiet again, David whispered the words that had lived in his heart all along. "That's my daughter. My brave, unstoppable daughter."